All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 22 of the Fantasy Timeline. I'm Josh at Real Fantasy TL. I'm with my main man Bill at Super Dupaflex. Bill, how you doing?
Doing good. Excited to talk football. Get away from the madness of the day, and excited for our guest.
Absolutely. So if you're here on YouTube with us, you obviously see a very attractive man with us. We got Garret Price from it seems like everything because I see you all over the place. So Garrett, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. Yeah, like Bill said, we're excited just to talk some, football, talk some fantasy dynasty, and just, take our minds off of the madness out there
For
for an
sure.
hour or so. So we're gonna get right into the news here. So it was either yesterday or the day before. Sean McVay came out and said he wants to go with a running back by committee. How do you guys think this is going to affect Darrell Henderson's value? Bill, why don't you go first?
I mean, I don't expect him to be a workhorse back, so that's not something that really it doesn't affect too much, at least in my evaluation of him. I mean, that's kind of expected, I guess, to me. I mean, they don't have Gurley, who is the guy, just can play in every facet of the game. So, I mean, that's pretty much what all offenses are working towards anyway, it seems.
Yeah, it doesn't change my evaluation as much either. Henderson is an incredibly dynamic playmaker, and everybody was clamoring for more touches last year. But realistically, he is more of a change of pace guy. He is more of a home run threat. He's going to be able to offer a really unique skill set, but that skill set isn't pounded between the tackles 15 times a game. That's not really his lane. So that's why we saw at times, Malcolm Brown part of the picture last year. So ultimately, we'll see who they end up making part of the committee with Henderson. It could be him. It could be somebody they draft, which I think is fairly likely. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that develops.
Yeah, and I brought it up because last week or so, pretty much since Gurley was cut, I saw a lot of love for Henderson, and it seemed like there was a lot of people saying that he is the next guy up. He is going to have a Gurley like share of the pie there. And it's not anything I ever believed in, but it was to me, it was kind of crazy going around and seeing what people were saying. I actually reached out in a couple leagues to try to trade for him just to get a real value check. Because sometimes you see things on Twitter
Sure.
and it doesn't match up what's going on in the reality of your leagues. And I actually had someone turn around and say that he wouldn't trade Henderson unless he got a first round pick. And I said, I mean, that's interesting. I wouldn't give 112 for Darrell Henderson, but I mean, I think that it was kind of matching up with the height that was out there. So
Yeah.
at least, before this came out, I don't know, I guess those people are probably still kind of buying into them. I doubt that one comment would take them completely off of their value. But, what do you guys, think about Malcolm Brown or John Kelly, value wise? Are they guys that, maybe you're looking to throw a low round pick at just to see if you can snag them and see if they're worth anything, or are you just leaving them alone?
Brown, I might be willing to throw like a fourth or something like that to see. Kelly, I'm really not too interested in. He didn't really even get any real action last year when they were kind of spelling it was kind of always Malcolm Brown. And the season before, Detroit had actually signed Malcolm Brown, and the Rams had that tender on him, and so they had the opportunity to bring him back, and they liked him enough to do that. So if I'm targeting anybody else, it is Malcolm Brown. But like I mentioned a little bit ago, I think I think there's going to be somebody else involved via the draft. There's enough talented running backs in this class. I don't think they're going to take one in like the second round or anything like that. But I think we could easily see a day 3 running back that could come in and compete for a share of that pie inside of that committee.
So Garrett, I mean, and this is totally my fault. I didn't mention this when I introduced you. You're kind of a rookie. I'll call you a rookie guru. You know that's kind of your thing. You're very good at it. I mean, I follow you on Twitter, and I listen to you on Dynasty Nerds. So I mean,
I appreciate it.
trust me. I mean, I know that you know what you're talking about. Not to put you on the spot, but is there a guy that you think would mesh well with Henderson's skill set to kind of give him that duo coming out of the draft class this year that would maybe kind of soften the blow of cutting Gurley?
I think if anything, because you have Malcolm Brown, that's your stereotypical like pounded between the tackles guy. You have Henderson, who is a little bit more of the home run threat. I think if anything, they would want to draft a guy that would potentially have a more well-rounded skill set, so that way it's not as obvious when they put a certain player on the field, what type of play is coming. So I think they would look for somebody like that. So, thinking with what type of draft capital I think they'd be willing to use, maybe like Michael Pirine could be a type of guy. DJ Dallas could be that type of guy. I'm trying to think of who else would be a good fit there. I think they would stay away from like the Anthony McFarlands, the AJ Dillons, where they're kind of more segmented into their skill set. I think they would probably look for somebody more well-rounded. Maybe even a Michael Warren could be a type of guy out of Cincinnati. So I think that would be the type of player that they would probably be looking for.
Bill, what do you think about Brown and Kelly? Any interest in either one of those guys?
Yeah, I might test the waters on Brown. Kelly's, I mean, until he shows me that he can get a play on the field, then I'll maybe be interested. But I would even consider doing something like in the late third, maybe, but I wouldn't do anything before the draft just to kind of see where, who's available, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But back to the point about Darrell Henderson. I mean, if you're making offers right now, there's nobody that's going to want to move him for less than a first, because if they have him, odds are they drafted him reasonably early last year. So they're a semi-believer. And, so you're at this moment, you're not going to get him for anything less than a first.
Yeah,
from those owners. I think once the draft happens, that's the time to make those offers if you believe in him, because then, there's additional competition for him. And if you believe in him, that's the time to do it.
And I also think that once we see where players go and drafts happen, I mean, that guy said that he wouldn't trade him for anything but a first. But let's just say Zach Moss goes early second. That might be a trade that you end up doing. Zach Moss for Darrell Henderson, depending on his landing spot, and you ended up in essence trading the second round pick for him instead of the first. So. I mean, I think the three of us agree on this. Malcolm Brown is worth, maybe going out there and trying to gauge his value and see if you can, get him for a third. Kelly, maybe if you're in a super deep league and you go 5 or 6 rounds in your rookie draft, maybe you throw one of those late rounders. But besides that, I mean, I'm with you guys. I don't really see any legitimate value in him right now, so that's cool. We kind of broke this thing down a little bit, and I think we agree on it.
Yeah, I
So
think
the
so.
next little piece of news is about everybody's favorite wide receiver. Antonio Brown has hired a veteran agent, and I didn't write his name down because I couldn't pronounce his last name. But the guy's been around forever. As he eyes an NFL return. Uh, Again, this is kind of a value check. Is he worth trying to make a trade for? Is there any value with him? Garrett, why don't you go first?
Uh, I'm not trading for him. There was a startup league that I did a couple weeks ago, and I think I took him in like the 25th round or something like
Yeah.
that. And it was just, hey, you know what? The players in the 25th round almost never hit anyway. Might as well throw it out there just for the just in case it might happen. So
Right.
he's worth owning, but at this point, I'm not trading anything of any real significance because more than likely nothing's going to stick. But in the off chance it does, I'm willing to pick them up off waivers or get something for free. But I'm
Right.
not paying anything for them.
You're nodding your head, Bill. You agree?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I've done this offseason. I picked him up a few times super late in startups and probably right around the same rounds as well. It's like you start looking at all those guys available and you're just like, how is this guy ever going to help me? It's like I'm either you may as well just grab whoever can get, shoot for the moon, and
Right.
it's the same thing. Like maybe if you don't know who to take even in a super flex, grab Andrew Luck. You never know. And then if you it's easy to cut those guys. You know what I mean? Like it's not like, oh, I got to see if he gets a spot and you
Right.
get some real young guy that you're wondering if he's even going to make the 53 and so it's just an easy guy to add and it's an easy guy to cut.
Yeah, and it's funny because one league I saw him on a roster, and the guy is totally rebuilding. So I said, "Oh, let me." He has Antonio Brown. I'll probably give him up for nothing. And literally, as I was getting ready to kind of come up with a trade offer, the news broke that he had all these charges in Florida due to that incident with the moving van and everything. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to pack this in and pretend like it never happened. So, I mean, I literally was in MFL, both sides. We had my roster, his roster up, and I was like, all right, let me see. And then the news broke, and I was like, I'm going to
Just
X out
kidding.
of this
Deuces.
tab. Yeah.
That's when you silently close the door and walk out,
Yeah, I was like, guys, it was great to be here. I had a wonderful time, and I'm going to leave this alone. Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things. If you want to, for the heck of it, throw a 5th or a 6th round rookie pick out there and just, go for it. But, I feel like he has a long, long mountain to climb if he, ever wants to get back into the league between these issues and the other issues he had before, he was suspended. It's just, or before he was cut by the Patriots, I should say. But
and when he gets reinstated, he's going to have some games that he's going to have to sit out. I'm sure. So
for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit.
Cool. So, so we went through the news as limited as it was for this week, and now we're going to go to what we saw on the timeline. So, wanted to bump this one up to the top because I know my man Jerry O'Shea at Jerry Shea FF. He has asked Josh why he hasn't accepted my trade offer for Zeke yet. And Jerry, I know you're an avid listener. I apologize. Work was crazy today, and then my son was feeling under the weather, so I was kind of swamped on both sides. But this is actually an interesting question because of the trade and kind of how this trade has progressed. And I think this would be an interesting time to kind of talk about trading and how to work through a trade and see if you guys agree or disagree kind of the way I work through a trade. So the initial trade offer, I'm in a league. I have the 103 in this league, so I did not do very well last year. It was a super flex league, and it started up last year. And I thought I was set with Phillip Rivers, Cam Newton, and Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback. And obviously, we know how those three fellas did last year.
Ooh,
So
that's rough.
yeah, so that's why I have the 103. So I'm selling off pieces. I have Zeke Elliott, and I put him on the trade block. And Jerry shot me an offer. So he shot me Juju and OJ Howard for Zeke. And I actually am a Juju believer. I think he's going to bounce back this year as long as Ben Roethlisberger stays healthy and it's not Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges throwing on the ball. So I said, well, I like the Juju piece. OJ Howard, I actually don't know how to feel about him, but I knew it wasn't enough. So I countered him, and it was Juju, OJ Howard, 209. By the way, this is a 12-team league. 209 this year, and a second round pick in 2021 for Zeke Elliott, and the 303. So, first of all, when you guys get trade offers, do you just reject the trade offer and counter, or do you try to talk to the guy off to the side and try to come up with maybe a trade? How do you guys work that?
For me, there's a few different ways. It partially depends on who I'm dealing with. I don't think I have like a universally tried and true method. If I have a relationship with the person, it's a league where, I'm friends with these guys. We talk, we hang out regularly, like whatever. My approach is usually like, hey, like, let's talk about this. Like, here's my value point. Here's where you're at. Here's a couple pieces that I have that I think could fill some holes for you. Here's what I'm kind of looking in return. So I kind of try to massage it that way. Use the relationship, use all of that to kind of work into the deal. If it's somebody that I don't have as much of a relationship with, maybe it's random Twitter analyst that I might follow their stuff or they follow my stuff, but I don't really talk to them on the regular. I might try to like reach out and see, but sometimes it is easier just to reject the trade, counter with kind of more of what you're looking for, and then you end up meeting somewhere in the middle is kind of where that ends up taking place. But ultimately, for me, I don't focus as much on like always quote unquote winning the trade.
Right.
Like, yes, you want to win the trade. You want to get what you think is like the best possible value. But for me, like when I am drafting, whether that would be a startup draft or rookies, for me, that's best player available. Like,
right.
I'm not focused on needs. I'm not focused on all of that. When I'm going to make trades, that's where I address needs. So, if I'm really weak at tight end and, I'm making an offer for George Kittle, I might slightly overpay to get George Kittle because I love the rest of my roster. And so I might not have like quote unquote won the trade, but now my starting lineup will not be able to be stopped in this league. So, so the trade valuation for me is slightly different than it would be for like drafting.
Gotcha. What about you, Bill?
Yeah, I mean it just depends on the time of the day and what my mood is, if I want to talk to somebody or I don't. I mean there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. So like if I'm in in an antisocial mood, I'm just gonna reject and kind of make an offer that I feel comfortable with and say, and I always explain when I reject why I reject. So they at least are getting notes, my thoughts as to why I didn't like that trade.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'll tell them I'm going to counter with some pieces that I do like, and if we have to hash it back and forth, that's fine. I'm usually not a guy that likes to keep going back and forth and back and forth. When I make offers, I'm typically close to what my max is. I don't really care. I mean, very much like Garrett said, like I'm not so concerned about winning a trade as it is to get a piece that I like. In particular, like if it's somebody that I feel is going to, increase in value over time, I'm willing to take a loss because next year the valuations are going to be completely different anyway. So yeah, I'm not the guy that likes to keep going back and battling for, late third value or anything like that. Like, to me, it's just not worth my time, especially when there's a billion leagues I'm in, and I don't have enough time to spend on all of them anyway. So, I mean, that's kind of where I am with trading. I just rather get it done, and hopefully we're both happy.
Yeah, so it sounds like both of you kind of adhere to the philosophy of maybe if you do counter, you're not coming back super overvalue in order to try to meet in the middle per se. You're kind of you'll counter, but you'll counter kind of what you think the value for that player is. You're not really trying to, as you both said, win the trade.
Not always. There's been a time or two I might have done that.
Yeah, it's like a mood. What mood you're in?
And it's who I'm trading with too. Like, there's a couple people that you just want to stick it to. Like, even if you don't end up making a deal, like, nah, I ain't letting you get one over on me. So, like, you're gonna have to pay like the moon and the stars to get this guy, because I'm not letting you get one over on me. And then there's other people I'm like, yeah, it's close enough. We're good.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. I'm fairly new to Dynasty, so this will be my 4th season playing Dynasty.
Okay.
And one of the things I loved about Dynasty, Garrett, you're talking about, you're not getting over on me. I play redraft, and I was so good at redraft that, like, people, especially in my home leagues, they're like, well, we're not trading with you. And I'm like, why? Like, I'm offering you something. It's fair for both sides. They're like, I just know you're going to win the trade, and then your team is going to be even better. And I'm like, but what makes you think that's going to happen? They're like, it just always happens. It wasn't actually any offer that I was sending to them that they thought was inherently, off, but they're just like, we just know it's going to work out for you.
I'm not dealing with you.
And so I like Dynasty more because there's not that fear, because I think you're like the majority. They're willing to take maybe a slight hit or a hit in the initial value of a trade, because they believe that at the end of the day, the trade on their side is going to work out for them. So it's one of the things I like. Yeah, and I'm the type of person, usually if I counter you, I'm giving you what I think value is. I'm not really trying to, I'm not trying to, get more. Now obviously if you change a deal and I think it's just inherently in my favor, like, obviously I'm going to accept it, but I try not to get one over. So I thought that trade was fair for both sides. And honestly, I felt bad because Jerry and I talk, we DM each other and stuff, but I've just been so busy the last week that literally most of the time I'm doing this on my lunch break, and I'm just like, all right, like, here's a fair deal. Like, let me know what you think. And then I have to, like, move on with my day because I'm just so busy. So Jerry, he rejected that trade, and I have Alexander Madison. So he wanted Zeke, Alexander Madison, and the 303 for what I said earlier, Juju, OJ Howard, and the 2 second-round picks. And I said, I'm actually a big Madison fan. So I was like, yeah, you can have Madison, but I am going to add Paris Campbell to my side.
I think that Jerry is very much a guy who likes to just keep battling back and forth, like what I was saying that I don't, because he and I in a different league were like, he would never accept an offer I made. Like, I had to accept one of his offers for the trade to be had, because anything I sent, he was going to try to get that little extra, percentage. So at some point I finally just said, okay, like, he won. So I accepted.
He wore you down.
Yes, he did.
Well, here's the kicker. After all of those steps and all that back and forth, Jerry just goes, all right, man, you win. Why don't we just go back to your last deal, and I'll get Zeke and the 303, and you get Juju, OJ Howard, and the 2 seconds. So I was like,
so you won.
So I was like, okay. So actually, Jerry, if you're listening or if you listen to this on the pod tomorrow, I'm actually in MFL right now. It is asking me, you are about to accept this trade offer. Okay. And I'm going to respond to your trade offer. And we're all happy. You have Zeke. I have Juju, OJ Howard in a couple of seconds, and I can start rebuilding my team here. So little live online trading. So now that you guys know both sides of the
Awful.
deal, you guys can tell me how poorly I did.
Go ahead, Bill. You go first.
Yeah, I mean, so are you giving him a third back?
I'm giving him 303. Yeah.
Okay, so the third and that second are basically equal in value, in my opinion. Like the
Mhm.
21 second,
Mhm.
and then the 303. Like, let's say those are similar. So you're doing Juju, OJ Howard, and
209 this year.
and 209. Okay, so nothing there is for sure,
Right.
but there is a lot of upside
Mhm.
for those two pieces. You are in a rebuild, so I don't hate it. I would consider maybe, like, I'm not super amped to have Juju on my team right now. I think his value is so high for the amount of risk I feel he has. And so that's probably my biggest issue with it. Like, I don't mind OJ Howard at his price right now. He is a freak athlete. He's a great blocker, which is to his detriment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but I get it. I mean, I'm worried about Zeke's volume this year. Like, I don't think it's going up,
Right.
but I think he still has a few years maybe of, elite production.
What about you, Garrett?
So in a rebuild, you're kind of strapped because you're only able to make so many moves. And people know that you're trying to unload these players that are at their peak or maybe even slightly past their peak. So you're a little bit handcuffed in that sense. I don't think it's a terrible deal. I'm not sure that I personally would have made that deal, partly because OJ Howard doesn't really move the needle for me at all. It would have been like, here, I'll toss you, unless, is it a tight end premium?
It is.
Oh, okay. That helps. That does change it for me then. Yeah. So I think that's decently fair then if it's a tight end premium as well. I still don't know that he's going to be a reliable starter for you,
Right.
but he's a solid backup with upside, which is good to have. And the picks gain a little bit of value because of it being super flex as well, because all of a sudden those quarterbacks get pushed up. And now you're, able to grab a guy at 209 that in a 1 QB, you would have had to take it at like 203. And
Right.
so that helps it out. So overall, I think it's a pretty fair deal.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not a huge Juju guy, but I do like in rebuilds building around young wide receivers because of the longevity as well.
Right.
So I can appreciate that. So I think it's a pretty fair deal.
Cool. So I didn't totally shit the bed. All right, guys. All right. Not feeling good about myself. So Jerry, we got it on there. We actually got a live accept on the pod. So I hope you're happy. So this next one is from Tyler Gunther, and I hope I said that right. I hear your name
You did.
It is right.
all the time, and I'm just like, if I ever have to say it, I'm gonna screw it up. At DHH_Tyler. Just basic tweet. I just witnessed at FF Stompy, Sam Lane, Stompy himself, take Eckler at 205 in a dynasty startup. So Garrett, I'll let you go first. Eckler at 205 in a startup. How do you feel about that?
I'm in a couple leagues with Stompy. He's a good dude.
He is.
That's a little rich for my blood though. I do like Eckler, and I get the reason you would do that. The hard part is you're basically assuming the ceiling. You're assuming that he is going to continue being a top 5 or 6 running back, which could happen. It's definitely possible. We saw it last year. He ended up, I think he was like 2 or 3 in PPR leagues. So I mean, he had a heck of a season last year. But there is a lot of risk involved with it. So I would have probably waited till the third to be feeling real comfortable to take him. But I get why he did it.
What about you, Bill?
Yeah, there's a ton of risk in that pick, in my opinion. Like, I mean, it's just when I'm picking in the first few rounds, I want surefire guys, and I'm not sure that that is what that is. Like, I don't know if Eckler is that, and I love Eckler. From the time he made the roster his rookie year, he's been on my rosters because, like, I'm like, wait a minute, this undrafted rookie made the 53-man roster, and
Right.
like that just blew my mind that was the case. You'd assume that a guy from a small school that wasn't drafted would end up on the practice squad.
Yep.
And when he made the roster, I was like, ooh, this is a guy I want to get on my team. And so I've always been an Eckler guy, and it's paid off. But man, I mean, the guys you can get in that area, that was a 12-man. I mean, that's 17th guy. I mean, that's like elite players still. And if it's super flex, oh my God, that's a first round. That's essentially a first round pick in like a 1 QB.
Yep.
So it's like, and his argument that I didn't include in that was, just based on his efficiency. He had so many fewer touches than any other player in that area. So he's banking on there being an increase in volume for him. And, obviously his efficiency will drop if that's the case, but, that gives him some room. And he already showed that he can do it. So I understand the thought process, but early on in startups, I am much more risk averse.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because a couple of weeks ago, I saw a mock. I can't remember where I saw it now. That had J.K. Dobbins going to the Chargers in the second round. And while I don't think that's going to happen, I mean, would we be shocked if the Chargers, who, let's face it, they're pretty good on defense. I don't think they have a lot of holes on defense.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like they're going to focus a lot of their draft capital on the offensive side of the ball. And with as deep as I believe this running back class is, would we be shocked if they draft a name that we go, oh wow, we think this guy, as the fantasy community, we think this guy is pretty good, and kind of drops Eckler's value a little bit. Gary, again, you're into this.
Yeah.
Do you see something like that happening? And if they did draft someone, let's say in rounds 2 through 4, do you see that dropping Eckler's value at all?
It would definitely drop his value if that's the case. I'd be shocked if it was in the second round.
Right.
They do have they have some holes at linebacker that they could fill, some offensive line stuff, and then I'm definitely not ruling out them taking a quarterback somewhere in those first 2 rounds as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out. That said, though, third round, fourth round, is it inconceivable? Not at all. They could easily. It depends a lot on how they feel about Justin Jackson as well, who is a good runner. Did produce a little bit last year. The thing that would leave me open to that possibility is, even though they did just sign Eckler, it wasn't to one of these monster deals. It wasn't to this $12 million, $14 million. I think it ended up being like 6 or 7, which is a hefty amount in today's market, but it's nothing that's like, oh yeah, there's no way they would add somebody. So, in the third or fourth round, could they add a Keyshawn Vaughn? Could they add a Zach Moss? Could they add, somebody like that? Yeah, I could see it happening.
Yeah, so actually, while you were talking, I looked up Eckler's contract. So he has a cap hit of $5 million this year, less than $6 million in 2021, and $6.5 million in 2022. So, like you were saying, not big time numbers, especially for the running back position where we've seen some hefty contracts go out the last couple of years. And by the way, I think the Chargers played it exactly the way they were supposed to, because
It worked out
we're
great for them.
we're starting to find out real quick that it's not worth it to pay running backs a whole lot of money. So I think they did it right, but it does leave them open to maybe in round 3 or round 4 drafting a running back and maybe throwing them into the mix and seeing what happens. So, Bill, 1 point.
Yeah, one more point about Eckler that I forgot to bring up was Eckler got a ton of volume because he had a quarterback that loved to throw dump offs to his running backs, and that we don't know who that quarterback is. Let's say Tyrod Taylor is the quarterback. He oftentimes with rushing quarterbacks, you don't see those dump offs nearly as much as you do because they're able to run on their own. So like that just means less opportunities for Eckler. And so it kind of limits his ceiling, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And I think another point that can be made that let's just say Justin Herbert or Tua goes to the Chargers. I have a feeling that they are going to want to open up the offense a little bit, just because, like you said, last year Philip Rivers was just throwing it to Eckler, and I think,
man, it was so painful.
and I think no matter who is, and even if it's Tyrod, I think they're going to try to get the ball downfield a little bit more, especially with Mike Williams, who just kind of
please give it to Mike Williams.
Suffered with Philip Rivers back there, just throwing,
is
3-yard dump off passes to Eckler, and or every once in a while he'd throw it up to Mike Williams and it'd be nowhere in the general zip code for him to catch it. So yeah, I think no matter who's behind center this year for the Chargers, I think they're going to make a concerted effort to try to kind of air it out a little bit more and kind of expand the offense a little bit more. So yeah, that could also be another thing that saps some of Eckler's value. So next one we have here is from Sigmund Bloom. I think we all know who that is at Sigmund Bloom. Is it okay to say this wide receiver class didn't quite live up to the hype upon closer examination? It could be historic if some of the second-tier talents develop skills to unlock their physical gifts and play finishing instincts, but there are more boom-bust prospects than expected. So, Garrett, I want you to start off. What, before the draft last year, what did you think about the 2019 wide receiver class, kind of overall?
The 2019 class?
Yeah.
So before the draft, overall, I think the general consensus was like, this isn't a very good draft class. Like, there's 1 or 2 running backs, there's a few receivers, and one of the guys a lot of people loved, and unfortunately myself included, Hakeem Butler, was one that we thought was going to be one of those guys, and then didn't go till the 4th and got injured and was out all season. And so at first glance it was like, oh man, this is going to blow. And then we had a bunch of these guys step up, and there was a couple of those guys that I was pretty high on, and I was a big Debo fan, I was a big Terry McLaurin fan, and then all off season I was hyping up Darius Slayton, and it worked out. So we saw that there were a lot more talented prospects in this class than we had originally anticipated. Because on top of those guys, you had, DK had an awesome season. Right. AJ Brown had an awesome season. We'll see some of these other guys that need to redeem themselves in their second year. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, N'Keal Harry, aforementioned Hakeem Butler. We'll see if any of those guys end up panning out and sticking. But so I wasn't super high in the class before, even though there were a couple players that I keyed in and liked. We saw that this ended up being actually a really, really good draft class for wide receivers. So yeah, that was kind of my thoughts beforehand and then during and after.
So Garrett, you said a name. I'm not sure what part of the country you're from, but I live outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
You can't say the name JJ Arcega-Whiteside around here unless
Arcega.
Yeah, unless you're willing to get into a fist fight. No one wants to hear that name. I believe that he is dead to the people of Philadelphia. if you say that name, it could get some curses hurled your way. So I just wanted to warn you
Just warn me.
Yeah, if you ever come to this part of the country, just that's one name. You could say all those other names. People are fine with that, but JJ Arcega-Whiteside has.
I mean, have you really written him off that quickly?
Have I written him off? No. Have the great people of Philadelphia written him off? Absolutely.
I mean, they did throw snowballs at Santa, so
Yeah, I mean,
we see they're not the most forgiving.
They if the majority of Eagles fans were the general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles, he would have been cut as soon as the season was over. So that's just kind of the general consensus.
Gotcha.
Around here. But yeah, I was also a big Debo fan, but I unfortunately kind of missed out on a lot of the other prospects that kind of blew up. I wasn't on Slayton. I wasn't on. Not that I wasn't on Terry McLaurin. I just didn't have the opportunity to draft him anywhere, which made me sad. It only helped me out that I was able to draft Debo in so many places, so that made me feel a little bit better. Sure. But Bill, what do you think about this?
Well, that's what I was going to ask Garrett. So Sig was talking about this year's wide receiver class. So when you look at that, comparing it to last year, like his concern is that maybe what everybody thought that this year's was going to be historic. It seems like that second tier of guys are much more, hit or miss kind of guys, boom or bust guys. And that's his concern, that it's not nearly as deep as maybe we first anticipated the 2020 class.
Bloom is one of the great minds in the game, and so I hesitate to disagree. But at this point, I do. I think so far from what I've seen, and I do watch quite a bit of tape. I think it has lived up to kind of what we thought it was going to be, and if anything, for me, it's actually looking better than I originally anticipated, because I was really more zeroed in on the running backs. I was focused on, oh man, the 2020 running back class, it's coming,
Right.
And obviously we had some of the bigger names, the Najee Harrises, the Travis Etiennes, some of those guys decide to sit out. And so even though it's just still a very good running back class, it's not as historic as we thought it was going to be at first. But as far as the wide receiver class goes, basically everyone, with the exception of like Devonta Smith and Sage Surratt, but basically everyone else came out and declared for the draft. And so we have the in my opinion, the top wide receiver in CeeDee Lamb, which is drawing a lot of Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins comps, and I think those are justified. I think he could end up being one of those types of guys. And then you have that next tier where there's a lot of really good receivers of Jerry Jeudy, which some people would argue should be in the CeeDee Lamb tier, Jalen Reagor, T. Higgins, Denzel Mims has really ascended. I really like his game. There's a lot of people that really like Ruggs. I'm not a huge Ruggs guy, but I get the allure of Henry Ruggs. And so I think there's a lot of players in this class that are really, really talented. And then even after that tier, you have the Bryan Edwards, who I think people are sleeping on because of the injuries. Michael Pittman Jr. out of USC had a monster season and then showed out on the combine on top of that. And then you even go, a couple tiers down from there. You got the KJ Hamlers, you got the Antonio Gandy Goldens. I mean, guys, I would not be shocked if we, and you've heard Mel Kiper. I think Mel Kiper said like 30 receivers in the first 3 rounds. That's ridiculous. We're not having 30 receivers in the first 3 rounds. But if you told me that we could have, 18 or so, yeah, I could absolutely see that happening. I would not be shocked to see 6 wide receivers go in the first. Yeah. It'll depend on how teams try to play chicken with, it's deep, so maybe we'll wait a little bit. So we'll see how that run starts to happen. It's either going to be late in the first or early in the second when we start to see like all these guys start flying off the board. But somewhere in there, it's going to happen. And I am actually still a very big fan of this wide receiver class.
So that's what I was going to Actually, I want to ask you about one particular guy because it seems like in that second tier, I hear very little about him. He's probably the least talked about guy out of that group, and it's T. Higgins.
Yeah.
Like, you don't hear anything about T. Higgins. It's just like he's there, but everybody lumps him in with Rager and everybody else and hit Ruggs, and everybody's arguing the Ruggs Rager thing.
Sure.
And, but T. Higgins, I don't hear anything about. So what are your thoughts on him?
T. Higgins is not quite the athlete that some of these other guys are. He didn't test quite as well as some of these guys, but he is an incredibly gifted in the sense of understanding how to play wide receiver. For somebody that is, 6'4", he's got the length, he's got the big play ability to be able to make some of these circus catches at times. He's also very good at understanding how to utilize his size. He's one of the better hand fighters in the class. So, using his hands to get off the line, create a little bit of separation, sometimes a little bit of stuff that they're trying to make sure that the officials don't see. Him and Denzel Mims both do that very well. And I think, we saw really, really good production from him his entire career at Clemson. And granted, he had other good receivers there as well to help shift some of the coverages. And, you have Trevor Lawrence, who's, this otherworldly quarterback prospect, which obviously helps. But I think that there is enough in his size and then understanding of how to play the position that he will be a very productive receiver at the NFL. Will he ever be like a fantasy wide receiver one? I'm not quite sure he will, but I think he'll be a very good wide receiver too for fantasy football for a long time.
So you think he's like the safest pick in that second group? I mean, maybe except for Judy.
Yeah, Judy would be the other one that would kind of be right in there. Judy's fun. His tape is fascinating because the way he utilizes his body, his body control is unreal. And the way he's able to, at the junction point of routes, create separation is just a thing of beauty. The thing I am a tiniest little bit worried about is Judy's kind of soft. Going over the middle, he doesn't like to do that. You start to see some of the alligator arms a little bit. He's not strong enough to like bang with these corners off the line at times. You don't see as much press coverage in the NFL these days, so that helps him. But still, I could see some teams being willing to like get up on him, press him. That's kind of why we started to see some struggles other than the concussions, but some struggles with Brandon Cooks is, teams decided to just get more physical with him, press him at the line a little bit. And then going up for some of the contested catches too. You need some of that physicality to be able to go up and get some contested catches. And so although he's one of the best separators in the game, I hope he's able to separate that well at the NFL, because if not, some of that physicality that he is lacking, he's going to need to develop that dog in him real quick.
Yeah, and Bill, you brought up a good point. It's a point that I didn't really think of until you said it about T. Higgins, because I listened to a ton of pods, and it's when someone mentions T. Higgins, it's almost like, oh yeah, he's in this wide receiver class too, because he doesn't get talked about so much. And I'm wondering, and Garrett, you can let me know if I'm right or wrong, but I'm almost wondering if it's because there's no general consensus on whether to put him kind of with that top group of 4 or 5 receivers, your Judys, your Lambs, your Ruggs, your Jefferson, or if he should be kind of part of that second class. So people don't know how to classify him, so they kind of just don't talk about him. Sure. I wonder if that's one of the reasons why.
Could be.
And it's kind of true, because it seems like his value from, let's just say, December of 2019 to now, I feel like has fluctuated so much that it's kind of showing, kind of like what us in the community are doing, where we're like, we don't know if T. Higgins is part of that upper class. Is he part of that second tier? So, that's just my thoughts, but.
Yeah, it could be. Or he's just kind of that like solid guy that people, it's not spectacular, so people they're not talking about him. you know.
Yeah, he's not as sexy as some of the other
Yeah.
other names.
One other thing, like, so you've done some work on the quarterbacks as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I was watching Tua, and I don't necessarily know if this was mainly with Ruggs passes or not, but it seemed like a lot of times like his passes were like on the body of Ruggs when it was maybe even slightly behind him. And I'm wondering if that's the case because he knows that he can't lead him too much on some of those, routes because am I saying Ruggs? Judy. On Judy because he doesn't think Judy's going to actually reach out to grab the ball. You know what I mean? Because it just seemed like he was kind of, a lot of times his passes were slightly, Judy kind of had to slow down to catch the ball a little bit. And I was wondering if that was like I equated it with that. Maybe he wasn't quite as precise on some of those timing routes, but with you bringing that up about Judy, it makes me think maybe that's also he feels like he's got to throw it more into the body of Judy as opposed to leading him a little bit.
I think over the middle, especially, that is somewhat of the case because you would see times, especially if the ball was over his head, it was more of like this than like really like exposing those ribs and getting up there to get the ball. He heard footsteps at times, and I'm not trying to take anything away from Jerry Jeudy. He's still my wide receiver too. I think he's a very, very talented player. But yeah, that is a legitimate concern. And whereas it used to be CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy for me in the top tier, and then everybody else, Jerry Judy's moved into that second tier now, where it's a much closer debate between Mims and Rager and all those guys.
So maybe I need to be a little less harsh on Tua in regards to his.
Maybe go back and see if it's that way with other guys too.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to.
I hadn't necessarily picked up on that, so I'm gonna have to go back in and look at that if it's specifically with Judy or if it's across the board.
I was getting a little nitpicky. When you get to those real high quarterbacks, you got to start, nitpicking. Like that's how I differentiated essentially Burrow and him. But I can't, like, they're both so fantastic that it's hard to separate the two guys.
No, absolutely. I completely agree.
So we got one more question for the night, and this is Garrett. I think this is definitely going to be right down the pike for you.
All right.
This is from Chris Trapasso at Chris Trapasso. I'm voting Florida athletic tight end Harrison Bryant as the combine does not match the film prospect of the 2020 NFL draft. He believes that Bryant is much better than his combine. So what are your thoughts on Harrison Bryant, and then kind of your thoughts on this 2020 tight end class as a whole?
So Harrison Bryant is analytics guys love Harrison Bryant. And he had some great production at Florida Atlantic. And there's some film guys that like him too. So I'm not trying to say he's only an analytics guy. I wasn't as enthused about his film as some of my other analyst friends are. I'm not trying to say that I think he is a bad player, but part of it is he was playing, he wasn't playing against SEC defenses. He wasn't playing against Big Ten defenses. He wasn't playing some of these cream of the crop. And I think when we look at some of the premier tight ends in the game, that we have a couple different things that have really separated some of these guys. So one, they're able to do it all. So they're good inline blockers, but yet they're also athletic enough to be flexed into that stand-up Y and runs routes out of the slot or from the X position or whatever. I don't think Harrison Bryant's going to be able to block enough. So we kind of have to take that out of the equation. So he's more of a move tight end right off the block. Two, he's not overly athletic. And granted, we shouldn't take the stuff that we see at the combine too overly serious. It's more of a confirmation of what you've watched on film or what your analytics are telling you. And if those are drastically different, that's when you need to consider moving a guy up or down. So like for me, there were really only two guys that I really considered even drastically moving in my ranks because of the combine. And that was Chase Claypool and Denzel Mims, because they both did significantly better than I expected them to. So I went back to the film, watched it. Claypool, I left basically right where I had him. I didn't change a thing. And then Mims, I moved up quite a bit because I'm like, oh, I clearly did not do enough homework on this guy. He's really talented. So with Bryant, you kind of have to do the same thing. Go back and watch the tape. And I think he is a good possession tight end. I think he has very good hands. And I think he will do a good service of being a first down chain mover. But ultimately, I don't know that he is enough of an athlete or enough of a blocker to be able to be what we want him to for fantasy. And when I say enough of a blocker, obviously you don't get points for blocking, but you're on the field more often and you have more opportunities to run routes, which is more opportunities for fantasy points. And so I don't know that he is either he has enough skill in either of those areas to be a true tight end that'll be useful for fantasy football. But then to go into the tight end class as a whole, it's a rough one. It's not a great class. As much as all the other three main positions for fantasy we love, this one is a little more shallow. So really there's only three guys that I would be willing to take outside of like probably the fifth round of my rookie drafts. And those three guys for me are Cole Kmet, Adam Troutman, and Bryson Hopkins. Those are the three guys for me that I think showed enough on film that they could morph into legitimate starting tight ends for their football team and also be able to have enough relevance in the passing game to be on my fantasy football team. So those are the only three guys that I would really consider taking before like just a late round flyer on Hunter Bryant or Alberto or somebody like that. Those are the only three for me.
So what's the earliest that you would take a tight end this year?
Are we talking just a normal league or are we talking a premium league?
Both.
Normal.
All right. So I'll do both. Normal. The earliest I would probably consider would be right around the start of the third.
Okay.
Yeah, probably right around the start of the third. Maybe if I really, things didn't fall quite how I wanted with the other pieces and we're at like 211, I might consider Cole Kmet depending on where he got drafted, to what team and what round. Like, if he ends up being like late in the second to a team that it's not a great passing attack, maybe not. But if it's, he's drafted at the, 202 to the, let's say the Cowboys or, somebody that it looks like I know they just re-signed Jarwin, so that might not be the best fit, or the Bears or, somebody that could really use a tight end and felt like they would utilize him well, then I would consider like maybe sneaking him into the second. But more than likely I'm looking at like 301, 302 is where I would like seriously consider taking my top tight end. As far as in a premium league, I'd bump it up a little bit, but I still, chances are if it's a tight end premium, it's also super flex. So you also have all those quarterbacks going up there. So honestly, it'll probably end up being about the same range. I just don't really see many scenarios where I'm going earlier than the third round.
Yeah, that was I completely blanked on what I was going to say here.
Oh, you're good. That happens to me all the time. My wife yells at me for it all the time.
Now I got to think about it, but go ahead.
That's cool. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking too, but I wasn't sure if I was too low or maybe too high. I was thinking like 301 kind of as the first spot. I'm with you. I don't think anyone is just kind of like this standout, can't miss. I mean, and it's weird because we're going from last year where we had TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant and
going in the first.
Yeah, when we were like, oh man, we got to scoop these guys up in our rookie drafts, or we're not going to get them. In this year, it's kind of like, if I don't end up with a tight end in 5 or 6 rounds, I'm cool. Like,
it's true.
So
it's partly the tight end class being weaker, and partly the rest of the positions being so much better that have really pushed them down like a whole round.
Right.
So my question, I do remember now, is like, okay, in a tight end premium, the first guy where you're going to take them, but does that add more guys that you're willing to take, later in later rounds because of the premium? And like, if so, like what are the next few guys that you would consider?
So when I get to the fourth round, there's two things that I'm willing to do. I have kind of my own little, I don't want to say formula. That's not really the right word, but my own little checklist that I have for guys that I think could break out. And I want them to have accomplished at least two of these three things, if not all three. So guys that I really liked their tape, thought it was, much better than the general consensus. Two, excelled at the combine, put up numbers that were conducive to, fantasy success. And three, have a path to relevancy. So it's not just like, oh, well, if the four guys ahead of him get hurt, like, no, that's not a legitimate path to relevancy. And so that's why I was so high on Slayton last year, because I really liked his tape. He did awesome at the combine, ran like a 4.39, I believe. And he had like a 40-inch vertical. I don't remember all the exact numbers, but it was a really impressive combine that kind of like slipped through the cracks. And then three, they didn't have any wide receivers with size. They had Sterling Shepard and they had Golden Tate. And then after that, it was like Corey Coleman and like, a bunch of scrubs that were left on the depth chart. So there was a path to him, being in the lineup relatively soon. So I snatched him up everywhere in fourth and fifth. So I'm either doing that, or I am looking at somebody that just has such stupid upside that even though the floor might be like below the basement, their upside is so high that I'm willing to take the risk. So to translate that back to tight end, even though I hated his tape, Albert O's upside is just absurd. He's a physical freak. Looked terrible most of the time, but he's a physical freak. So in the fifth round in a tight end premium, I'm probably willing to like try to snatch him up. I did like Hunter Bryant enough that I would consider him maybe even as early as the fourth, just because he was such a good pass catcher, that, hopefully maybe he falls into that Evan Ingram, Dallas Clark, like, one of those kind of roles, where he could have some fantasy success. Outside of that, another guy, I liked DeGuara out of Cincinnati. He's kind of undersized, but he played with a lot of grit, very physical for being undersized. So he might be another guy that I would like consider taking like super late.
So one more thing before we get out of here, and kind of as you were talking, it made me think of this. Talking about floors, basement and stuff like that. Who are a couple of sleepers, maybe in those, fourth, fifth, sixth rounds of your rookie draft that maybe people aren't talking about a lot, but you think have a little bit of upside, guys that maybe you're snagging that other people aren't?
Well, if you're on my Twitter at all, I've been hyping up DJ Dallas like there's no tomorrow. So he's definitely a guy. And I've seen him go a lot in late thirds, early fourth rounds of drafts so far. Another one at the running back position, it's hard because my heart is torn on this player because he tested poorly and he's super undersized, but I still kind of like JJ Taylor. And I think in the right situation, in the right role, he could be a very good PPR asset. I don't know that he'll ever be Tariq Cohen or be James White, but I think if there was a player in this class that could end up being one of those guys, I think he's the guy. So I'm willing to do some dart throws at the end of drafts. At wide receiver, I really like Van Jefferson out of Florida. Real good route runner, had some high praise at the Senior Bowl, which we've seen translate to, a lot of good players lately. And part of the reason he kind of flew under the radar so long is he transferred from Ole Miss, where he was behind A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf. And, they had Dawson Knox at tight end and DeMarcus Lodge and all of these really talented players. So he didn't really get to see the field as much as an underclassman. So transferred to Florida. Put up some decent numbers this year. I'm interested in him. And then Jeff Thomas out of Miami is one of those home run speedster type threats. We have Henry Ruggs that you're going to probably have to take in the first. You have KJ Hamler you'll probably have to take in the second. This is a guy you can probably take in the fourth, and is, maybe not Ruggs, but I don't know is he's that far off from Hamler, but just the name isn't as big. He was a very, very highly sought after recruit, a top 100 recruit coming into Miami. Had some off the field stuff, missed some time. So it's just things just didn't end up fully working together like you would have hoped for him. Get a good coach, a fresh start. I think he has enough talent to maybe be one of those sleeper type players.
How about a quarterback in Superflex?
In Superflex, I like Anthony Gordon, which is he's becoming a little bit more popular just because of how popular Gardner Minshew is, and he's coming from the same school, Mike Leach system. So he's another guy that I think I would be willing to take a chance on. I also like Nate Stanley a little bit out of Iowa. Just a very nothing exciting or flashy about him, but he's a smart player that gets the job done. And right team, right scheme, guy gets hurt. It could happen. It could happen.
When he's on, he reminds me of Roethlisberger.
I can see that a little bit.
But yeah, it's like when he's on.
Right.
So it's just consistency, but that's any quarterback, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. So that's all we got. Garret, appreciate you coming on with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, it's funny when you said if you follow my Twitter, because I knew exactly who you were going with as soon as you said that. So, but no, appreciate it. And by some chance, if someone's listening to this and they don't know who you are, just tell them where they can find you and what you're up to.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Dynasty Price. Most of my work, my podcast stuff, is at Dynasty Nerds. We got a lot of cool stuff that we've been cooking up. We have the Dynasty Film Room. So, if some of these guys we talked about tonight, you're like, I don't know anything about that guy. Hop onto the Dynasty Nerds Film Room, watch some of their tape. But yeah, that's mostly what I'm doing is all at the Nerds. I used to help co-host a show called the Dynasty Rewind. Really good show, really good guys on there. I said yes to a lot of stuff, so I wasn't able to always continue doing everything. So I'm not anymore, but I'm sure I'll still pop in and do a guest appearance here and there.
Yeah, and again, appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
I mean, you're one of the smarter dudes in the business, so
and nicer dudes.
I appreciate it, guys.
Appreciate you taking a little bit of time with us, and thanks a lot. If you were on the live stream, we appreciate it. Or even if you're watching this on replay on YouTube, just remember to click the bell and subscribe so you know when we come on. If you're listening to us on the pod, again, we appreciate it. We love it all. We love seeing the comments. We love people, telling us what they think. And, if you are listening to this in podcast form, just remember to subscribe and give us a rating and review if your podcast platform allows you to. So on that note, Bill,
I have one thing to say.
He has one thing to say.
Yeah, we have we still have the giveaway for the rate and reviews for the Rookie Digest. So DM and you'll get in the drawing for a copy, and just send us a photo of your rating, review, or your subscription.
Cool. Bill, thank you for reminding me, because obviously I was ready to forget that. So on that note, Bill, we're out of here.
Late.